When is the use of lethal force legal in the United States? In every state of the Union, lethal force can be used to protect an innocent party from an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. But is that the only time? A recently signed bill in Tennessee defines other situations where deadly force can lawfully be used within the state. So we'll look at that law next here on the Constitution Study.
Neighbors and have a few good friends. Every day we're everyday Americans. Oh, every day we're everyday Americans.
Hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution, teach rising generation to be free. Glad you could join me today. This idea of lethal force, it's a controversial topic, especially when it deals with questions of self-defense. Now, what Tennessee has done here is unique, not completely. I think Texas has similar laws, but it caught my attention. I thought it was worth spending a little time discussing the topic of deadly force, its use, and when it's appropriate. I'm just using the Tennessee law as a framework for such a discussion. Now, if you want to find my notes, you want to keep an eye on what I'm doing, go to the website, constitutionstudy.com, and look at the article. I've got links to all my sources. You can double-check my work and, maybe leave a comment. Let me know what you think, both about the law and my analysis of it. Now, I'll talk more about the website and what you can do there at the end of the episode, but for now, let's get to this Tennessee law about the use of deadly force. Let me start by pointing out I am not an attorney. I do not offer legal advice, only my analysis of the legal and constitutional issues presented. I recommend seeking legal counsel for any questions I present here. There's a line from the Spider-Man comic books. With great power comes great responsibility. Self-defense and use of force are great powers and come with great responsibility. More often than not, self-defense is discussed in the context of the Second Amendment and your right to keep and bear arms. The Second Amendment reads, "A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." Just as there is more to the Second Amendment than self-defense, there is more to self-defense than the tool you use. The use of force exists along a spectrum. For example, the Tennessee Code Annotated, or TCA 39-11-614, states, "A person in lawful possession of real or personal property is justified in threatening or using force against another when and to the degree it is reasonably believed the force is immediately necessary to prevent or terminate the other's trespass on land or unlawful interference with the property." Notice, the section of the law does not authorize deadly or lethal force, only the degree of force reasonable to prevent someone's trespass or interference with real or personal property. For example, if someone enters your property, I would think it reasonable to block them forcefully if necessary to prevent them from going any further, even if only to guide them off of your property. Now, if someone steals your bag, I would find it reasonable to physically detain them, both to return your property and to wait for law enforcement to arrive. The latter, however, sounds more like Section B, which reads, "A person who has been unlawfully dispossessed of real or personal property is justified in threatening or using force against the other when and to the degree it is reasonably believed the force is immediately necessary to re-enter the land or recover the property if the person threatens or uses the force immediately or in fresh pursuit of the dispossession. The person reasonably believes the other had no claim or right when the other dispossessed a person, and the other accomplished the disposition by threatening or using force against the person." So Tennessee law allows you to use force to re-enter your land or retrieve your property that was unlawfully taken from you. And there are limits here as well. For example, the use of force must be in immediate or in fresh pursuit. In other words, if someone steals your car, you can't go to their house a week later and threaten force to retrieve it. If you pursue the person who has unlawfully deprived you of your property, you can use reasonable force during that time. So if someone steals a woman's purse and you chase them, you can reasonably use force to stop and detain them for law enforcement. Again, reasonable force, not lethal force, is allowed. Here is where HB 1802 enters the picture. Before HB 1802 was signed into law, deadly force could not legally be used to prevent a property crime. Unless a person is justified in using deadly force as otherwise provided by law, a person is not justified in using deadly force to prevent or terminate the other's trespass on real estate or unlawful interference with personal property, meaning it was not lawful to use deadly force to stop someone from trespassing on your property unless it was justified elsewhere in the law. Neither was it lawful to use deadly force to stop someone from committing property crime. There had to be another threat recognized by the Tennessee law for the use of deadly force to be legally justified. Now, under HB 1802, subsection C was replaced with, except as provided in subdivision C2, a person is justified in using deadly force against another if the person would be justified in using force against another under subsection A or B. There are several criteria necessary to escalate from the use of force to the use of deadly force under HB 1802. First, the person must be justified in using force under subsection A or B, which I've already covered. When and to the degree the person reasonably believes deadly force is immediately necessary to prevent or terminate the other's actual or attempted trespass, arson, damage to property, including damage to livestock, burglary, theft, robbery, or aggravated cruelty to animals. Now deadly force can be used, but only if it's immediately necessary to stop an actual or attempted trespass, arson, or damage to property or livestock. The question is, when is it reasonable to believe deadly force is necessary to prevent these things? Notice what deadly force can only be used to protect. Let's start with trespass, arson, and damage to property. Is there a scenario where these actions could reasonably be responded to with deadly force? Now, since arson could threaten other people, that makes sense. But what about trespass or property damage? Now, I could see a situation where someone who is trespassing on their property or damaging a property could be considered enough of a threat to warrant deadly force if the trespasser is armed, acting aggressively, or threatens you. If the actions of the person would lead them to be a threat, like in a carjacking, that would warrant the threat or use of deadly force. If the property being damaged is protecting young children, that could warrant deadly force. Notice that damaging livestock and aggravated cruelty to animals could also be justifications for the use of deadly force. Livestock is more than someone's property. It is how they make a living. If someone were hurting or trapping in a way that endangered livestock, that could lead not only to the loss of the animals, but to the food on the owner's table. But again, the force must be immediately necessary. No finding the person later and using force to stop future threats. There are other limitations to when deadly force can be used. The person reasonably believes the property cannot be protected or the other's actions terminated by any other means, or the use of force other than deadly force to protect or terminate the other's actions would expose a person or a third party to a risk of death or serious bodily injury. First, the use of deadly force must be the only way to protect the property. It's not like you can automatically escalate to deadly force. There has to be no other option. Or the use of deadly force was necessary to protect a third party from death or serious bodily injury. This third party language pretty much mirrors existing use of force laws as I understand them. There's one other limitation to the use of deadly force. A person is not justified in using deadly force against another individual under this section if the individual is facing away from the person. The idea is you cannot use deadly force against someone who is retreating. For it to be reasonable to use lethal force, they must be engaged in the crime, not leaving. Neither can you sneak up behind them and use deadly force. The use of force is not a one-sided issue. Under the Fifth Amendment, we find no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That requires a balancing act with the use of force. Someone cannot deprive you of your life, liberty, or property without due process of law, but neither can you deprive someone else of that right. And while it would be helpful if there was a brightly defined set of circumstances for different levels of force, life doesn't work that way. We are human beings, not animals, and we need to use our reason when it comes to the use of force. The use of force, especially deadly force, comes with more than just responsibility. It comes with consequences. Notice how often the term reasonable is used in the law. To the degree it is reasonably believed, the person reasonably believed. Both those phrases are repeated multiple times, which means the use of force must be backed by reason. Not the outburst so often seen on videos, not the emotional response to an attack, not even defense of pride, but there must be reason. More than a reason to use force, but a justification for the amount of force used. To have a reasonable use of force, we need to reason through how we would use it. In the heat of the moment, you are more likely to make an emotional decision rather than a reasoned one. Watch for situations and ask yourself, How much force would you use in that situation? When you see riots on the news, ask yourself, how would you respond if you were the owner of the property that was being destroyed? A bypasser observing, or even a member of the group? How far would you go? How would you defend your home, a loved one, or a friend? Under what circumstances would you use force or simply call the police and be a good witness? Consider just how much force you would use. Since the lawful use of force, deadly or otherwise, requires some reasonable conclusions, we should consider it in the cold light of day, the conditions under which we could reasonably use different levels of force. Now, for any use of force, there will be consequences, not just legal questions of whether or not the use was justified, but the need to live with those decisions. Is saving your car, your wallet, or even your cattle worth the consequences of the use of force? This is especially true with deadly force. I cannot tell you what the right answer is for you because, well, that'll be different for everyone. Personally, for me, there are few possessions that are worth taking a human life. However, any punishment government might hand out are well worth it to protect my family. It may take some time, but I believe I could live with myself if I took a life to protect the life and well-being of my family. I do not come to that question flippantly. I spend a fair amount of time considering different situations and my response, because proper preparation prevents poor performance. When my family is on the line, no amount of preparation is excessive. Now, what will you do to defend your life, the life of your loved one, or your property? Just because the law says it's lawful doesn't mean it's right. You will have to live with the consequences, good or bad. You may have to live with taking another human life or watching while something truly terrible happens to another human being. Are you prepared for those consequences? The one area I would have liked to see expanded on in this use of force in defense from state agents. If law enforcement trespasses on your property, infringes on your rights, and threatens violence against you, what is the reasonable amount of force that can be used to protect yourself, your family, and your property? If a law enforcement officer unlawfully threatens you and damages your property, what is the reasonable amount of force you can use to protect yourself? If, under TCA 3911-614-1C1B, I can use deadly force to terminate a trespass, does that include trespass by a law enforcement or other government agent? I would like to have seen that described more fully. The Second Amendment does protect your right to keep and bear arms. Those arms may be used in your defense or the defense of others, but there's also the expectation that you would participate in the militia to maintain the security of your state. Are you prepared for that sacrifice? The use of arms can come with some serious consequences. Have you considered the long-term effects of your short-term actions? When I got married and when our child was born, I started thinking about what I would do to defend them. What would I sacrifice to keep them safe? If you live in Tennessee, as I do, the state has made lawful the use of force up to and including deadly force to protect not only human life, but your property. This great power comes with great responsibility. Because if and when you use force to protect life or property, you'll be held responsible for how you did so, both by the law and by your conscience. Are you prepared for that? Use of force can be a touchy subject. It's something a lot of people don't want to spend time thinking about, but really it's important if we're going to understand and defend our lives. I'm sure most would recognize if your life was being threatened, if someone was pointing a gun at you or a knife, use of deadly force makes sense. What about your property? And it's a lot of circumstances that are involved. For example, if you use deadly force to stop a carjacking, would it make a difference if you were alone in the car or if a small child was in the back seat? That's why the term's reasonable. It's what would a reasonable person think is allowable in those situations. And sadly, no, there's no bright line. But that's also good news because you couldn't write all the bright lines necessary. Mostly what I want to make sure is that you're taking this opportunity to think about the situation. Under what situations would you use force and how much force would you use? I've seen a lot of people use force for stupid things, right? Pride or arrogance or just, whatever, emotional response. That's not right. The question is, are you prepared for when you would use force and how much force you would use, say, to defend your life or the life of a family member or defend your property? Tennessee law is interesting. I still think there's some tweaks that can be made. but it certainly is enough to get us thinking and discussing this topic. And I hope you'll take this as an opportunity to think more thoroughly about your willingness to use force. Now, if you want to find out more, of course, you head to the website, constitutionstudy.com. I've got this article and a ton of others. I've written over 500 articles. They have videos that help explain all these different topics. Of course, you can sign up for a mailing list. So every time I release new content, you can get a copy of it, whether it's my news feeds or the articles I publish. It's all there. You can check it out. Just go to constitutionstudy.com. If you'd like to support the work that we're doing here, go to constitutionstudy.com/shop, our online store. Most of you people buy books, but I've also got t-shirts and mugs. And heck, if you just want to donate to the cause, you can do that there. All that money goes to keeping the Constitution Study up and running. Nobody here takes a salary. We pay for all of this. And if you can help, well, that'd be great. It also helps me take this on the road to talk at other events and meetings without having to charge them for my time. All that can happen by going to theconstitutionstudy.com and hitting the store and purchasing something or donating to the cause. You can also support us with your cell phone. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. Now, I didn't join them for that. I didn't join them for their 4G and 5G coverage or even their 100% US-based customer support, but because they take a portion of every dollar to support organizations that are protecting your rights, defending what made America great in the first place. You can join me by going to patriotmobile.com/constitution, find a plan that works for you, see if you're eligible for a discount. Veterans, first responders, even families with multiple lines get discounts. And if you use the code Constitution at checkout, you get your new line activated absolutely free. So use your cell phone to defend your rights and support the work that we're doing here at the Constitution Study by going to patriotmobile.com/constitution, sign up for a plan, check if you're eligible for a discount. Don't forget that code Constitution at checkout for free activation. And support the Constitution Study and others with your cell phone. Most of all, I hope you'll come back. I hope you enjoyed this content and you'll come back and, hey, maybe bring a friend or two the next time we meet for the Constitution Study.
Love your neighbors and have a few good friends every day.